It is the morning of Tuesday, the 21st of December 2021. The time is 6:47 a.m. Sitting on the beach here at Ayampe in the Pacific coastal province of Manabí in Ecuador. I've got my feet in the sand and I'm a nature person, so I'm feeling a lot more comfortable and relaxed. So this should help with the quality of the audio. I've been reviewing some of my videos recently and I noticed that in some of them you can hear me breathing and inhaling loudly, which is not great. And I've also noticed that when I've been rewatching my own videos that I actually like watching these beautiful nature scenes. So I've made an effort to give you one of those this morning. And shout out to Latter Rain. I'll put a link to her channel below. That's another channel putting out prophetic warnings from the Holy Spirit, and I noticed that they had them in this format. They just had beautiful scenes of nature to inspire you. So I'm going to try to do that from now on, because I thought that was a really nice idea. And I love nature. I'm a conservationist, so it's a good thing for me to do. So you don't have to watch the videos, but if you do want to watch it, I want to give you guys something nice to look at. So I'd zoom in on the islands more, but I've only got digital zoom on my phone, so you can just look at the waves if you want to. Alright, so the night before last, on the night of Sunday the 19th of December 2021, I had a dream, and it was an unusually detailed and long dream about the Third World War, and the Holy Spirit showed me Russia invading the Ukraine. I believe this will happen within 6 months. I'm not sure. I was not given that specific information. But I don't think it's an accident that I posted that video that evening. That evening? I think I posted it earlier that day. I'd recorded that video the day before. I posted the video, which is under 2 minutes, talking about how World War III is close and urging you guys to prepare to get ready for what is coming. And I mentioned Russia invading the Ukraine in that video, so I don't think it's an accident that I was then given this dream by the Holy Spirit that evening. So the dream started off, and I was in the Ukraine and we were being invaded by Russia. And I was a Ukrainian soldier. I didn't exactly get told. I knew I was an Ukrainian, and it felt like I was in the army. And it wasn't super literal, it was mostly symbolic in terms of what I was being shown. I mean, it was a war, but I was being shown the critical parts of the information. A lot of that information was being given in symbolic form. So there were about 4 or 5 key points of information that I was given. And the Holy Spirit was breaking down to me the tactics that the Russians are going to use when they invade the Ukraine. So I'll just clip into it now. So the first thing I was shown, I was in a valley. I'm closing my eyes to visualize it now. I was in a valley of temperate / pine forest woodland of the kind you get in Europe, and it was winter. And on the other side of the valley was half of a town, and I kind of got the sense that most of the town, so there was this town that was bisected by a river in this wooded valley. And we were on one side of the river, which had the smaller part of the town, and on the other side of the river was the larger part of the town. And this whole town was surrounded by forest, and it was winter because there was snow all around. And I saw missiles coming down and just annihilating the far half of the town on the other side of the river, and I was with these other soldiers. I'm pretty sure we were soldiers, so I'm just going to say that. and we were observing this happen with binoculars, and it was fast and sudden. And I think this was representing two things. I know for sure it was representing the fact that Russia is going to use missile strikes and airstrikes to kind of overwhelm the defenses of the Ukrainians and destroy critical, I think, entire towns and cities. And Ukrainian military units, they're probably going to hit their armor with these things too, their tanks, artillery. So they're really going to use missiles and airstrikes to leverage that advantage they have over the Ukrainian armed forces, because from what I understand, Russia has a very large air force. I don't think the Ukrainians' air force is anything to compare with the Russians, and they do, from what I understand, have much better missile and artillery technology on the Russian side too. So that's the first point. I think the second point, and I got this while meditating on the dream later on in the day, yesterday, thinking about what I was shown. I think the second thing that it was showing me, and the Holy Spirit has been doing this in recent dreams that I've had, it will show me one scene, but it will be representing more than one important point of information. For example, I have a video on my channel about the dream that the Holy Spirit gave me, where I was shown tsunamis striking the southeast coast of Tasmania. And what I was shown when I was given that information is the scene sort of morphed from Wellington Harbour to Tasmania, and it did that to show me the fact that tsunamis of the same size will be hitting both Wellington and Tasmania. Interestingly, the largest mountain behind Hobart, the capital of the Australian state of Tasmania, is Mount Wellington. So there are these interesting, poetic, elegant segues that the Holy Spirit does. There is that old saying, God is a poet. So there's quite a lot of that going on in these dreams, and it's almost artistic, the symbolism and the metaphors. So it's just to kind of key you in on how to understand some of the messages that I receive in these dreams. But I've seen other people get messages of a similar kind, where they'll be given a prophetic dream and they'll receive 2 points of information about quite different things in one visual scene. So it's kind of fun to decode them, actually. It's a bit like a puzzle. So the other thing that I was being shown, and this is what I worked out when I was meditating on it yesterday, I think the Holy Spirit was showing me that Russia is going to really hammer, quite possibly nuke, a lot of the cities in the eastern part of the Ukraine. I think the river in the center was the Dnieper. I think the D is silent. Dnieper River. I don't know. Forgive my mispronunciation if I got that pronunciation wrong. I am not from that part of the world. But that river cuts the country into two pieces on a north to south axis, and I've seen other videos and prophetic dream material online where the Holy Spirit was showing people that a lot of the cities in the eastern part of the Ukraine are going to be hit with missile strikes and possibly nuked. I think people were being shown that some of them will be nuked, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So I think that's the other thing it was showing me in that scene. 90% sure about the second part, 100% sure about the first part. The second scene was really interesting. So I was what looked like a Ukrainian spy or a scout, and I was in the Ukrainian countryside, and there was snow falling. Ooh, getting chills now. Just confirmation, it's also saying that this is important. So I was on a ridge of a hill with that same kind of pine temperate forest woodland, and it was winter, so there was snow, and the snow was thicker in this part of the dream. It was maybe 2 or 3 feet high, so 60 to 90 centimeters high, and I was this Ukrainian spy or scout, I'm not quite sure which, but I was hiding underneath a tree, and I was watching the Russians. I was watching lines of Russian soldiers marching up this ridge past me, and they were marching up this ridge line and passing me about 10 meters, 30 feet to my right. And I could see the steam coming off their breath, and I could see their faces. And they were young men and they had beards. They looked like they were late 20s, maybe early 30s. They were really strong. They had full winter gear. I could see their assault rifles slung over their backs, and there was a long column of them, and they kept coming in this line. And they were advancing deeper into the Ukrainian territory as the invasion took place. Now, obviously you're going to have your troops, ground troops, moving into the enemy territory when you're invading the country. That's not the most important thing here, though it was pretty interesting to get such an up-close and detailed view. That's unusual for me in these streams. The key part here is that I saw some of these soldiers, and some were walking, but the key part of this scene was that one came past and he was on a Bactrian camel. Now I work in conservation, and I'm fascinated by and love Earth's biodiversity, so I read about different plants and animal species all over the world. You may have noticed if you watch some of my other videos that I've got good general knowledge. I'm a bit of a nerd, an intellectual. I love learning, so I'm always learning. So I know what a Bactrian camel is from back when I was 17, reading books about mammals from different parts of the world. Not everyone watching this will know what it is, so to break it down simply, there are two main species of camel in the world. The first is the more familiar one to most people, that has a single hump. They're from the area of the Middle East around, Saudi Arabia, that kind of region of the world. They are extinct in the wild. They're completely domesticated because all the wild animals of that species were taken into domestication probably centuries ago. I'm not sure of that detail. But the Bactrian camel comes from a different part of the world. It comes from Eurasia, and there are still some wild Bactrian camels around. Apparently there's, I think, between 100 and 300 still living wild in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, in Central Asia, in Eastern Central Asia. So they are a critically endangered species, and they're almost extinct, but they're still around and they're not gone yet, which is a nice thing. But most of them are domesticated too, and they're used as beasts of burden, and they have two humps. And they're bigger, really hardy animals. The Gobi Desert is one of the highest, coldest and driest deserts in the world, a very, very harsh environment, so they need to be really tough to survive there. So they would be the ideal animal to be using as to use as a beast of burden when you're invading a country and you need a rugged, tough animal for logistics to carry gear and troops. And this Russian soldier was sitting on one of these Bactrian camels, and as it came up this hill, I could see the steam coming off its nostrils, and he was kind of swaying like he was riding a ship on this massive animal. It didn't make sense at the time, so I had to think about that and meditate on it yesterday. What does the Bactrian camel symbolize? Well, it's an animal from Central Asia. In the dream I was thinking, like, what's this Russian soldier doing riding an animal from 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers to the east that's not from this part of the world at all? And it's pretty simple and easy. The Bactrian camel represents Chinese-made, probably designed as well, certainly Chinese-made and manufactured military transport equipment and troop transports. So it's representing trucks and APCs, vehicles from China. This is interesting because it indicates that there is going to be a very high level of cooperation and coordination between different Axis powers in World War III. And it parallels some stuff I was shown in an earlier dream when I saw Russians invading New Zealand, and they had all this knowledge about who was going to be a potential dissident and a rebel and a freedom fighter once they invaded, and they were grabbing those people and shipping them off to camps, possibly to be executed, certainly to be imprisoned, to concentration camps. They were grabbing the people who they knew were most likely to fight back and who were likely to be a problem, and they knew who they were based on social media intel. A detail I'll add on to that dream now, I recalled the information. I understood what this detail meant only meditating in the days following that dream, and I didn't put it in that video, so I'll put it in now. in that dream where I was showing these Russian soldiers coming onto the shoreline in Eastbourne, Wellington with these huge guns and then arresting civilians, including me. And they arrested me. I had this smartwatch on my left wrist and it was coloured in highlighter yellow. The highlighter yellow was representing the fact, this is the Holy Spirit conveying this information in a symbolic form again, that I was, quote, highlighted for detainment and arrest based on stuff I'd been posting online in the past. So you're going to stand out like a sore thumb based on your online activity. That's, you know, how they're going to know who to grab to nip potential threats to occupation in the bud. So they're being really smart about it. They've got it really well planned out. So the Russians were helping the Chinese in the invasion and conquest of New Zealand. New Zealand will be invaded, conquered, and occupied and colonized by China. But there are going to be Russians and North Koreans there, from what I've seen and from what others have seen too. But I think they'll be there in smaller numbers and they'll kind of be helping out. So it looks like they'll be doing deals, and then in other parts of the world which the Russians will invade, conquer, occupy and colonize in the near future, which will principally be in Europe, in the NATO countries, in the EU, it looks like, you know, they're going to be doing most of the work, but the Chinese will also be helping them out in a limited capacity. And people have had dreams about the invasion of the UK, and they're seeing very, very old planes with propellers with Chinese people flying them, Chinese soldiers and airmen flying them. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration and coordination between these different groups. And they're going to kind of accessorize and assist each other with their greatest strengths. The Chinese are master tacticians and they're really good at making things, but their intelligence isn't so good. Russians and the Chinese aren't that good at innovating and creating new things, but the Russians are amazing innovators. They come up with crazy new inventions, and that's partly why they're going to have all these powerful super technologies and super weapons, because they're very innovative and creative. There's something in the DNA and genetics of Caucasian people from certain groups. They're very, very innovative. And yeah, if you look at the number of inventions and patents from certain countries around the world, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Russia, they all stand out. So there's something about those people and their genetics, they're extremely creative and innovative. So there's that, and then the Russians are masters of psychological warfare and spying and espionage, which you might know if you've seen James Bond films. I mean, it's fiction, but it kind of has a basis in reality. So they're really good at intel and creating new weapons. So that's how they'll be assisting the Chinese, I think. And the Chinese will be assisting the Russians with manpower, with sheer numbers of people, and with stuff they're going to make in their factories. So yeah, so that line of soldiers filed up, including the soldier riding the back train camel, and then one of them saw me and he came over and he shot me. So that was the end of that part. And the third scene was more disturbing. So the Russians were using war rape on the local woman to traumatize the local population. And I was shown the town square in a small town in the Ukraine. And I was with other local, I'm getting chills again now, other local men and civilians, and we were getting ready to get organized to get guns to fight back. But Russian special forces soldiers at that point then came into the square with huge guns and weapons, and the Holy Spirit directly told me that the Russians are going to send special forces deep inside the Ukraine ahead of their main ground force invasion thrust, you know, their push into the Ukraine. So they'll be probing ahead, and they will be acting to destabilize and neutralize pockets of resistance from civilians organizing into militias. So they're going to be hammering the Ukrainian military of their mainstream military, but they know from their spying and their intel that a lot of Ukrainian civilians, and Ukraine does have some kind of militia. I watched a Vice clip about this just a few days before I had this dream, and put the link to that in the video in the description box below. Put the link to that video there so you can have a look if you want. And they were interviewing people from one of these Ukrainian militias. So they've got a plan to deal with the Ukrainian military. They've got a plan to deal with the militias, and they'll be using special forces to kind of soften up areas before the main ground forces go in. And it was a really sad feeling, because I was a Ukrainian man in the stream, and we were talking together about getting organized and getting the weapons ready to resist. And it was weird. There was a feeling of fear, but also of kind of excitement about what was to come. It was mixed feelings, but those fears turned to kind of despair and hopelessness for the most part when this thing happened and these Russian special forces came in to the town, and we were just overwhelmed, and they had everything planned out, and they kind of, it's like they cut our Achilles tendon. We couldn't even walk, we couldn't even do anything. And then, yeah, which is very sad, because I'm a straight guy, and I really love feminine energy, and I love and appreciate the energy of women. I guess I love and appreciate the energy of all humans in its own way, but, you know, if you're... Yeah, so... make a real effort to try to treat females, women, girls with respect, and rape is always something that's always kind of horrified me, because it's just such an evil act. So this was very disturbing for me. But yeah, they were raping a lot of the women in the town, and that was to kind of humiliate and demoralize the local population. I think they might have also been doing it to get intelligence from them, but it was a pretty horrible and barbaric tactic. But the Russians can be pretty effing brutal when they invade European countries, and if you've read the history of World War II, you'll know that it was something like 1 million German women a year were being raped from 1945 to the early 50s after Germany fell. And they're going to do this again, not all of them. This stuff always happens in war. To be fair, you know, the forces, men from the Allied armies did it too. It's not like every side doesn't do this stuff in war. You know, Allied forces did war crimes. New Zealand soldiers in World War II, there would be German soldiers surrendering on Crete, and soldiers from the Māori battalion would, I think other parts of the New Zealand army, I know for sure the Māori battalion did this. They just cut their throats and just massacred, just executed all these Germans who were trying to surrender, which is contravening the Geneva Convention. That's a war crime. But you never hear about it, because war crimes tend to only be committed by the people who lost the war. When the people who commit the war crimes win, they tend to write history, so they say it didn't happen. But yeah, New Zealanders committed war crimes. Germans committed war crimes against New Zealanders in World War II. Most of the time it's just people shooting each other, and often people play fair, but, you know, the psychopaths and demons get to kind of run amok in those scenarios, so war crimes are a part of war. I do understand from what I've read of history that there is this kind of feral psycho Genghis Khan energy when armies come out of the east at times. I almost wonder if that's like a weird spiritual energetic thing that keeps playing out over the centuries, but they come in and they're really crazy brutal. And yeah, if you read I mean, it's not a place to talk about that, but no, actually I will. I'll put a link to a video below in the description box about some of the things that Russian soldiers did when they invaded Germany and at the later stages of World War II. And it's beyond horrifying. You could put the stuff in a horror film and it would shock people compared to most horror films that are out there today. I think there's a village called Niemersdorf in East Prussia, and what happened there is beyond your imagination of horror. And the stuff, you know, unfortunately it's going to happen again this time around. And yes, all sides do it. Like, you know, the stuff a lot of the, you know, the Wehrmacht did, the German army when they went into Russia and in World War II was pretty horrendous too. So I'm not pointing the finger at the Russians, but there is that history there. Young European female friends who I've given them the link to my channel, and they should kind of have their ears up, because yeah, I don't want that to be you guys. I don't want that to be any of the viewers of my channel, but that's going to happen in the Ukraine, and it's going to happen in other parts of Europe when the Russians come through. And if you're My advice is not to risk it. Unless you're going to fight in the resistance forces or you're in the armed forces, why would you risk it? Just get out. You're risking that and many other things and horrible, horrendous trauma of some kind at the bare minimum by being there. So just don't be there. That's my advice. Yeah. And you know, the Germans did horrendous things when they went into Russia, so in many ways it was karmic. It was reaping what they sowed thing when the Russians came back and did terrible things in Germany. But regardless of who started it and who did what first, yeah, that's coming. This war, rape element, and women being treated terribly, molested, raped, sexually abused, that element is coming in this war, and yeah. People should be aware of that. And a lot of women in Western countries, I'm going to be blunt, I'll be blunt, and this needs to be said, they're going to be taken back and used as sex slaves, and they're going to be trafficked into sex slavery. So they'll be prostitutes, but not by their own consent, and they won't get paid. And yeah, they'll be raped hundreds and maybe thousands of times. And there'll be thousands of women from the US, probably New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK. You need to know this. If you're getting these warnings, you need to know how bad it's going to be. I mean, if you're a woman or a girl, you're at risk of being hauled back to these countries and used as a plaything by the elites. And you know, that's a fate worse than death. And that will be happening to a lot of the women. It will also happen to some of the men. It will happen to everyone. It will happen to children. The men typically the thing that will be a fate worse than death for them. It's much better to just be shot in the head in 2 seconds than to have the following things happen to you. The fate that will be worse than death for men is instances where they'll be tortured for 5 to 30 hours, and the occupying forces will just draw it out, and it will be like the most horrible horror film you'll have ever seen, only they'll be doing it for real. In some cases they won't be too creative, it'll be like horrendously bad, but not like the worst thing you could ever imagine. But in some cases it will be. Again, don't risk it. That's my advice. And I was talking to a Ukrainian friend of mine, Alex, who's staying at the hostel I'm currently staying at. I woke up from that dream the night before last, and I told him about it that day. And he made the point, he said he didn't want to, so he's from the Ukraine, but he's a smart, conscious guy, and he was saying he just didn't see the point in being there and being a statistic when he gets killed by the Russians when they come in to conquer the country, because he knows they're going to lose. He's not overly nationalistic, but he was saying, yeah, just don't be there. That's his thing. He was saying, just if you know what's coming, and just don't be there when it happens, if you've got the options. That's my advice to viewers. I don't think I'm going to have many Ukrainian viewers, but this is kind of, this is stuff that's going to happen in all these countries that get invaded. So, missiles, Bactrian camels, war rape, Russian special forces. I think it was pretty much it. Yeah, that was pretty much it. I got shown that it happens when the weather is cold. So yeah, in the first part of the dream, there was light snow on the ground. In that scene with the Russian soldiers coming up the ridgeline, it was 2 to 3 feet, 60 to 90 centimeters of snow, so it was deeper snow. So I believe the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is going to happen within 6 months. I believe they're going to do it in winter. I don't know, but I think the winter's really long there, and the snow can go into early to late spring. So I believe the Russians are going to invade the Ukraine within 6 months. And I think it's going to happen mid to late winter, spring. I think it might start in the winter, but it could start in the spring. It's going to happen when the weather is still cold, that's for sure. And I saw an article on Zero Hedge today. To be fair, the Russians are trying diplomacy, and they have been very clear about their red lines. And NATO keeps wanting to push their sphere of influence eastwards, and the Ukraine wants to join NATO. And Russia has made it 1,000,000% clear that if that happens, it's going to spark conflict and that they'll go into the Ukraine. So to be fair, the Russians are warning, they are attempting diplomacy. This is one of the reasons I found it really hard in New Zealand. Anglo people know how to fight. I would say Europeans need to learn how to fight, and Anglo people don't know how to do anything else. This is one of the advantages of being a hybrid. You quite quickly learn how to do both.